Welcome to the second episode of Culturally Appropriate with Jerod Hollyfield, and I am obviously your host, Jerod Hollyfield. We've got a jam-packed show for you today. First, we're going to be talking about the new Wes Anderson release, Asteroid City, that is still playing in theaters, but also now available on video on demand. Then we're going to seg to talk about probably the controversy that has been gripping Nashville for the last couple of weeks, not related to the mayor's race, which is Jason Aldean versus Tyler Childers and their representations of the South in their most recent music videos. And then finally, we're going to end with this week's weekly film rundown. So let's go ahead and get started. One of the wonderful things about Barbie and Oppenheimer doing so well and hitting that cultural nerve is that people might be in the habit of going to the theater again, which is something that is great for our popular culture. It's something that is great for demanding the kind of entertainment that we want. So, what I'll be doing over the next couple of weeks, and especially in the weekly film rundown from here on, is giving my opinions, my advice, my picks for what movies you might want to go check out in a theater. A lot of people say movie theaters have tickets that are way too high these days, but I wanted to go ahead and run over some of those options. You can get a premiere plan, subscription plan at AMC or Regal Cinemas, which are the two chains located in this area, for $19.99 a month, which means if you go see two movies, you've saved yourself $13. Even if you have a family of four and you buy four of those and you go to the movies regularly, you're saving a ton of money there as well. Regal is priced at about the same. As for the Belcourt, if you go to the Belcourt and you become a member, which they're doing a membership drive right now, it's $50 a year. You get $3 off of all of your tickets. So any movie ticket for you after that 50 is $8.50. You get a massive discount on concessions, and not only that, you get to write off your tax deductible donation of the membership that you bought. So in a lot of ways, if you think about how many streaming services you blindly signed up for and don't really watch, which I'm very guilty of, I have to have them though for preparing a show and being on the edge of all of this cultural commentary, you're probably actually saving yourself money. Going out, going to the theater, seeing movies with other people, seeing movies as they were meant to be seen. So we're big advocates of that here at the Pamphleteer, and especially on my show. And one of those movies that definitely needed to be checked out in a theater, but still plays well at home, is Wes Anderson's Asteroid City. So I know Wes Anderson has had a very contentious relationship. He has a lot of fans. He has a lot of detractors. Over the last few years, he's become a meme. I wrote the article this week, Asteroid City's American Trauma, which is not really a review of Asteroid City per se, but more of an essay. One of the things that I've done in response to Covenant is taken a look at movies that deal with trauma. This is the fourth in a series. Previously, I looked at Jennifer's Body, the horror movie from 2009, the remake of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre from 2022 that Netflix produced, a movie called Sick of Myself from Norway that is about exploiting tragedy online, and Wes Anderson's Asteroid City is the fourth in this entry. So what I loved about Asteroid City, what I think that's really impressive about it and about a lot of Wes Anderson's work in general, is the way that his movies have this reputation for being incredibly pretty. He's got the framing. You may have seen the site that I talk about in the article called Accidentally Wes Anderson, where it's people taking travel photos and making them look like frames from Wes Anderson movies. But when watching a Wes Anderson movie, the characters, their actions, their motivations, their ethics are not nearly as pretty and perfect as the frames. There's a great sense of cognitive dissonance when watching a Wes Anderson film. And sometimes he goes a little too dark, as he did in my favorite Wes Anderson movie, The Darjeeling Limited from 2007. And he kind of loses part of that niche hipster audience. And sometimes he hits it just right. With Asteroid City, I think he has hit it just right. But because of this, a lot of critics, a lot of audience members look at his films in a very shallow way. That, oh, I've seen the new Wes Anderson. Look who's in it. Wow, look at the great soundtrack. Oh man, the framing was so cool. I heard Bill Murray is going to be in the next one. Let's move on. So one of the things that bothered me about Asteroid City's reception, and it did not get universal praise. It had a lot of defenders and a lot of detractors, but just about all of the defenders used the phrase a meditation on grief, which makes sense. Jason Schwartzman's character, Augie Steinbach, is grieving the loss of his wife in the movie, but the movie's about so much more than that. The movie's really about what happens when people are left with their own thoughts in a situation. The movie also has a very potent political undercurrent. So, for those of you that haven't seen the movie, it basically is a film about a junior stargazer convention in the 50s in the deserts of New Mexico. And all of these parents and their child prodigy kids descend on this desert for this 2 week stargazer camp that's run by the US military. And they're all nominated for their science fair projects. And one of the sort of weird comments that Jeffrey Wright's general makes early on is that all this stuff is the property of the US government now. So, in the middle of all of this stargazing convention itinerary, there's a surprise alien invasion with an alien played by Jeff Goldblum, which who else would you want to play an alien but Jeff Goldblum? So we have quarantine. Wes Anderson really gets into a lot of COVID trauma, but in a great way, because unlike a lot of these movies that are about social distancing and mask wearing that are being submitted to every film festival in the country right now, Wes Anderson actually has something to say about quarantine and its effects on the American public, and by extension, its effects on American movies in this particular film. So, what his movie really is about is people that are dealing with their own personal trauma. So, Augie is a war photographer and he's very desensitized to violence. He's very closed up. He starts a relationship with Scarlett Johansson's character, Midge, who is kind of a combination of Rita Hayworth and Marilyn Monroe. She's an actress that's in her prime. She's starting to realize that she can only really be typecast in this one kind of sex pot role, and she's trying to break out of that. But the audience members aren't letting her. So she's also got a lot of repression going on. And then we have the kids who are sort of dealing with a world that needs them in this Cold War and this rush for science education and space, but doesn't really like them, doesn't understand them. So this is a movie with a very dark undercurrent. It's also very witty. It's a triple frame narrative. So the play that we're watching, Asteroid City, is actually a play. And we're watching a documentary of a theater director directing this play of Asteroid City. So Schwartzman and Johansson, they'll go out in black and white and play the actors playing these characters, and then we go back in. And then that's all narrated by Bryan Cranston. So really what we're watching is a TV show that is a documentary about a play, and then we're watching the play that's being performed. So there's all of this narrative distance that sort of allows Anderson to explore the motivations of his characters. I would strongly suggest that you check this movie out. I don't know where it's going to end up on my own personal top 10 for the year, but I certainly know that it's going to be on there. Up until Oppenheimer and Barbie, this was definitely my number one choice for must-see film of the year, and then I know it's one that's going to stick with me for a long time. So I did want to play a quick clip. For those of you who have seen the trailer, you might not have seen an actual clip from the movie. So we're going to take a second and look at this clip from pretty much the first 10 minutes of the movie. It looks like we're running into a little streaming trouble here. So one thing you'll see in the movie is all of the boxes these characters are trapped in, and this is before their quarantine. But if you look at the frame, you see that Wes Anderson has got them all sort of arranged and isolated, using the door frames, using the window frames. And that's a lot of his visual aesthetic that the movie changes as it goes on, and these characters sort of reach out to one another. So, long story short, Wes Anderson's Asteroid City, highly recommend it. It is still playing at the Belcourt Theater in Nashville, and I think that would be a great way to see it. But if you can't do it there, It is available for rental, I think, for $19.99 through any of the major streaming platforms. So comes highly recommended from me. So next, we are going to move on to maybe the debate that has gripped Nashville for probably the last 2 weeks, and that is Jason Aldean's "Try That in a Small Town," a music video that was pulled from CNT, and outlaw country star Tyler Childers' "In Your Love," which premiered last week and got a lot of press attention because it is a gay Appalachian love story. It's essentially the Brokeback Mountain of Appalachia, written by famous Kentucky author and poet laureate of Kentucky, Silas House. So, with me to discuss this controversy and also how it relates to the history of Southern popular culture, I'd like to welcome on Dr. Christopher Michalski. Hey,
Hello.
Chris, how are you?
Hi, well, how are you?
Doing great. So, this has been sort of a major talking point here in Nashville, and I know that Rolling Stone and a lot of national publications have picked it up. The battle between Tyler Childers and Jason Aldean and these two music videos. I think what I'd like to do, if it's okay with you, is just maybe get your impressions of both videos, sort of separate from the song, and you see what you have to say, and then we'll go from there.
Sure.
So what are your thoughts about these two videos?
I mean, it's interesting to prepare for talking with you all. I watched a number of reaction videos, which I find to be a really interesting new internet phenomenon. The kind of I don't know if you've caught any of them, but just like people first time watching things. So it'll be like Phil Collins in the Air Tonight, just classic things that people want especially younger people to watch. I think like Dolly Parton's Jolene. And so I happened to find that there are a whole bunch. I mean, people are riding the wave of whatever's big. So there are a whole bunch of reaction videos to this song. The "Try That in a Small Town" is just, I mean, I'll speak right now from my own personal response to the music and the videos, which is that I'm not a target for either of these, in that I really enjoy a lot of older country, but I kind of fell off interest of it from about the 80s on. And so in that sense, I tend to skew more towards the Jason Isbell and I guess Tyler Childers' interest in country music, which is a little bit more alt. And so I definitely preferred the "In Our Love" video. It's much more beautifully shot. This has got all of the hallmarks of for me, of pandering, just in terms of the lyrics and the music, which is just kind of basic guitar driven. You're waiting for the solo, kind of thing. You see the shots of him like standing and looking cool in sunglasses at night playing the guitar. And then just a lot of really visceral content that's made to make you kind of feel like, look at that, you have a clock and a flag on fire. It's meant to kind of raise your ire, all of the stark shadows and whatnot. So just on a pure, I guess, aesthetic and emotional level, it's not as enjoyable to watch this video, and it's far more enjoyable to watch the "In Our Love" video. That's just kind of on a basic aesthetics point. Then that obviously branches off into a variety of different cultural and political responses that one might have. But on an aesthetic level, I don't enjoy watching the "Try That in a Small Town." In Your Love" is gorgeous. I honestly, I could spend most time, or I could rewind Addiction Problems Rant, but then anyway, just to say. And so I think there's a buy-in for audiences to want it.
Yes, absolutely. And there is sort of, I think, a worse idea of these problems being able to actually be addressed, but people denying them in those towns. I mean, I live in a town of 200 people. I love living here. But, the big story on the front page every single week is somebody in a drug bust and meth on the interstate, because we live in a small town right by the interstate. So this stuff is tried in a small town on a weekly basis, and we don't have Jason Aldean coming down with a Glock and taking care of it.
Right. I really appreciate you saying that, because that's the thing. I mean, it's true that the kinds of crime it's obviously going to be less than in a large city based purely on numbers. And then there's always, it's going to rise exponentially in terms of numbers. But yeah, it's ridiculous to say that like there is not crime in a small town. It might, it's of a different style, and it sometimes plays out. It often plays out very differently. They actually do know the cop. They probably wouldn't spit in his face. If they did spit in his face, it would have ramifications on Sunday morning at church. It still plays out. It just plays out in a very different way. So you're right. It's a kind of full wish fulfillment. And I think also to something that you might be thinking too, it's not to say that there isn't a wish fulfillment in our love either. I found it aesthetically more enjoyable to watch. It's really hard to stomach the idea that somewhere in 1950s America there was a wonderfully, beautifully accepting home of same-sex relationship and integrated family dinners. And I'm not to say that there weren't same-sex couples and that there weren't interracial friendships, but the image that it paints of this kind of like it's just one guy who's homophobic at work, where and a terrible illness, and yet if they could just be left alone in their little home, it would be absolutely perfect. That's also incredible wish fulfillment.
Yes, absolutely. And a really quick story, in the small town that I live in, right around COVID, some guy came and stabbed an officer in the arm. It was this very violent attack. And he got caught very quickly. He tried to break into the police station, but it took like a year of the legal system to actually get this guy to trial. So this is not country justice.
Right.
And I'm talking about a country that voted for Trump 80%. That was the home county of Al Gore, and was the county that went the most for Trump in the red state of Tennessee. So, these same problems exist. There's no sense of purity here, which also brings me to the Childers video, because I love the song. As I was listening to it for the first time, I was thinking, like, I wonder how many people were planning on playing this song at their wedding if they were outlaw country fans, and how this video is going to affect that. Obviously, because it's a great song, it's an illustration of the video, but I have the same problems with the video that you do, mainly that it's gorgeous, but it really does lean into all of these Southern stereotypes. And the story, to me, like, if this story were The Notebook, if this were in a John Michael Montgomery music video, it would be just another like funny maudlin country video.
Yeah.
Aesthetically, beat wise of the story, and I'm a big fan of Silas House, the author. So he has read at basically every college I've ever taught. I've met him at book festivals. I've really enjoyed a lot of his writing. But he sort of set himself up, and I think Tyler Childers has it the same way, as sort of this like blue oasis in the middle of this very red area, because this is where he teaches. And I'll never forget in the movie Hillbilly, which is, I don't know if you've seen the movie Hillbilly. I know we've talked about it before, but it's a documentary about how America socially constructed the hillbilly. There's this moment in the 2016 election when Silas House is watching the election returns, and he actually says to the camera, like, at this point, I just don't care about what happens to the people in Kentucky. So I feel like there is sort of this inauthenticity there. And I think when people sort of get blinded by ideology, no matter how talented they are, the art suffers. And this is an example of that to me. I mean, the four-leaf clover motif, I could look at the video all day. If I were running like a local restaurant where everything was made in Appalachia, I'd have this playing on a white wall in the back all the time. So, but I mean, I don't think either of them are particularly successful artistic products. And the reason that I don't think that is because they give these very radical visions of the South that apparently they both think they created. I think we probably do need to, in this discussion, mention that in Jason Aldean's video, he did choose to shoot it in front of the Maury County Courthouse, which is where a lynching took place in the early 20th century. We have no way of knowing if Jason Aldean actually said, like, I want to shoot it here for that reason. My guess is that he didn't. My guess is that whoever production designed the video just didn't do their homework. And that
I think that's the most likely explanation.
A massive misstep, but I also don't know how you could, because that was a building that during the summer of 2020, a lot of out-of-town people came in and tried to hold a protest at, and our current House of Representatives member, Andy Ogles, was the mayor at the time. So that was in the news, and when I saw that courthouse in this video, it gave me pause. And the pause of, like, someone did a sloppy job in the terms of designing this video. And
Well, it sounds like, and I'm speaking from some ignorance here, both in terms of who Jason Aldean is and Tyler Childers, and that courthouse and those protests. Like, so I can only speak from the perspective of maybe. Well, I was in Baton Rouge in from 2016 to 20 through 2021, and so I could speak to some of the protests that happened there during the Black Lives Matter protests. There um, we had a nationally recognized police shooting that happened, which brought national attention on the town. And so I could speak from that perspective that I could see this. It sounds to me like maybe somebody picked the courthouse for the reason that it was the site of protests, but maybe that's it. They're not necessarily looking into the history there or why it was chosen. There was a famous photograph taken on Airline Highway, which is in Baton Rouge, which is not otherwise very photographable, but it's of a Black woman encountering. I think she's encountering some of the really military geared up, tactically geared up police officers in Baton Rouge, and it was a minutely viral photo, and I could see somebody wanting to stage something there without necessarily looking into the background of why they were protesting there or what the incidence was behind that or any of that, just to kind of trigger that one association of protest. And I'm not defending the video choice of that. They should have done a better job because it does seem like a dog whistle. It does have that. It does have that feel. There were a lot of responses to the video where how could they not know? This is what you were supposed to do. And they really should have done better. But you and I both know, a lot of us know that when it comes to the day-to-day working of a job, somebody's often left in charge of something like that, where that is not that they're not doing that research. They don't foresee that kind of controversy coming at all.
Yeah, but by the same token, I feel like, especially in a city like Nashville, which is very much a metro area as opposed to a city, with most of the country music professionals who live here, live in Franklin, live in Spring Hill, live in Columbia, where Maury County is. You kind of got to know. I mean, if you spend some time in the small towns that you're writing about, and even just like cursory time in those small towns, you should probably be aware of that. I mean, I would feel
agreed.
like,
Agreed.
And I feel like also both of these videos, Aldean's video is very openly provocative, but in many ways, Childers is as well. And as somebody from Appalachia, like, I remember there being gay couples. I remember people being, either like in a known secret, very, very similar to like Lafayette and True Blood, where, it was accepted for the most part. People were sort of, especially in the 80s during the AIDS epidemic, a little bit leery, but it wasn't like this level of prejudice on a grand scale, or it wasn't that nobody knew anybody was gay in Appalachia, and they were shocked when they went to the big city to find it out. And I do feel the video kind of leans into that point just a little bit. Like I'm all for a great gay love story, but if you're gonna do it, make Brokeback Mountain or make a Gus Van Sant movie.
Well, so that speaks to I think a central point that also relates to our shared interest in rural and urban and north and south issues. But the genre plays a huge part of this. These are Try That in a Small Town is like number one on a number of charts, I think, right now. These things are packaged to sell a lot and widely, and with very little nuance. They don't, I don't know that there's always a call for nuance in terms of in terms of pop art, and so both of these, I think, were meant to, kind of eschew, kind of just jump past any kind of nuance, because it can be quickly unifying and divisive at the same time. And I do find that, that Try That in a Small Town is intentionally divisive, which is, it's funny too, because in a number of the comments that I've been reading, reactions of people trying to defend the song, and the video. They're just saying, I don't understand why people are so upset. This is about people standing together, and we just don't want to have to deal with crime. But honestly, it's an incredibly antagonistic video and song, and it's meant to be divisive, and it's meant to try to piss off liberals, and it's doing it, and it's doing everything right. And it's part of one of the reasons I think people enjoy the song is it's pissing off liberals, and liberals love hating that conservatives are liking it, and everyone can yell at each other. I do find that In Our Love is not as divisive in that sense, although I think it is it's definitely antagonistic in the sense that it's definitely trying to show two men kissing as much as possible to get traction. And that'll get traction. It'll either anger some people to watch it, or it'll make other people love to want to watch it. Either way, both of them get traction. And so I do think that that's something that should be thought about. Again, not defending either of them in this, but it feels odd. No, I do want to call them to task on it, because we both admire some of the films of Burt Reynolds for this reason, in that they're able to, pander's not the right word, but reach broad audiences while still holding and containing ambiguity and nuance and complexity. A side note to Oppenheimer is that I think Oppenheimer and Barbie both succeed in this tremendously well. You can watch both of those movies with your brain relatively off and enjoy them. You can go into Oppenheimer and just get the story of Oppenheimer and be like, wow, that was interesting. What a guy. And for 3 hours in length, it was an incredibly fast-paced movie where you're just kind of glued to the screen the whole time. Barbie, gorgeous, fun, laughing. You can watch both of those without thinking too much, but they also both bear rewatching in terms of the kind of nuance that they're adding, the stylistic play, the complexity of both of them, which I don't think either of these music videos have. So yeah, I don't know where I was going with that entirely.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking that we're gonna get the Ben Shapiro video this week of Ben setting fire to some Tyler Childers records.
Right.
Then I also probably realized that this was the first time Ben Shapiro has ever heard of Tyler Childers. So I don't think we're gonna get the same level of moral affront from figures like that on the right for the Childers video. But one thing I did want to ask you as we move into Burt Reynolds, which is what I see. That was the first thing that I thought about when I saw these videos. Is have either of these dudes ever seen a Burt Reynolds movie claiming to be from the South? Do you feel like Childers, because his art is a little more ambitious than Aldean's? And I want to say that I think the Jason Isbell line, where Jason Isbell challenged Jason Aldean to write a song and said he wasn't a true musician because he didn't write songs, was kind of a line of crap. Jason Isbell has the same ability to foam at the mouth on Twitter as Donald Trump or Jason Aldean. And a lot of times it makes me kind of respect his art less, because I'm like, if this person thinks like this, how could they possibly write like this and really be sincere? But do you think someone like Childers has more of a responsibility, because their music is more ambitious, to not pander in this way? Or do you think it's okay for him to do artistically?
That's a good question. You and I will probably differ on this. I admire Jason Isbell for the exact reason that you, I think, don't, which is that I think he's admirable in his attempts to try to write more anthemic, politically poignant songs that are also meant to be artistically ambitious. And that's something that I admire in an artist, because it's not easy to do. And the Jason Aldean song demonstrates that, that's trying to be anthemic, but it's not thoughtful. And so I appreciate anthemic songs that are also thoughtful. I think it's incredibly hard to do. So I think maybe he's trying to do that. I think that, I think it's an incredibly hard feat to pull off. I think that in a lot of Gen X to millennial, I think in their DNA to some degree, especially maybe more millennial DNA, there is a memory, a cultural memory of the Boomer 60s. And the Boomer 60s is this just cornucopia of both artistically interesting and anthemically, politically engaged songwriting, from not just Bob Dylan, Joan Baez, to all of the Simon and Garfunkel, where they're often finding interesting artistic ways to express complicated political situations. One that randomly comes into mind, which I don't think most people even know of, would be like Simon and Garfunkel's melding of Silent Night and the 7 o'clock news. Do you know that at all? But it's them, playing Silent Night over 7 o'clock news. Like, that's interesting. That's a really, it leaves you with a lot of emotions. So I think that there's an attempt. And again, you and I both definitely disagree on this, but I feel like Bruce Springsteen has tried to do that, and he has sometimes succeeded and sometimes not. And I think that Taylor Swift is trying to do this, and she has sometimes succeeded and maybe sometimes not. And I think that I would say that Tyler Childers is trying to do that. Whether or not it's reaching those levels or not, I don't know. But it doesn't detract from me. I find it interesting and ambitious. And honestly, this is meant to be kind of like a Notebook love story. I think it's meant to try to it wants the male and the female viewers to want to engage with the story and be like, oh no, he died. Like, that gets us all on an emotional human level. Whether it's nuanced or not, no, but it's not meant to be. It's supposed to be, like you said, kind of maybe almost on in the background in a gorgeous way, so that you go, oh, this gets me every time. So I think we'll disagree on that part. I do think that he might try to and want to succeed in what you're talking about, which is create a mass market piece of art that also stands up under sustained scrutiny, which I think you and I both agree Burt Reynolds films do.
Yeah, and I go back to Nathan Lee, the film critic, one of my favorite film critics. His defense of Brokeback Mountain as saying that, for years, gay characters were always at the side of these kinds of movies, these like romantic dramas and comedies. And yes, Brokeback Mountain is basically The Notebook with cowboys and shot beautifully, but like, gay people needed that movie. Like, that movie needed to exist, and it needed to be treated for what it was. So he was attacking the gay community for like pushing back against it as a member of that community himself. So, long story short, I'm still going to buy Tyler Childers' record. I think he's great. He's one of my favorite outlaw country musicians, as they're calling themselves these days. But I did want to talk about Burt Reynolds, especially when you're mentioning the 60s, because Burt is a figure, and this was one of the first articles I ever wrote for the Pamphleteer. And I know you and I are working on a book about Burt Reynolds, especially as a film director, but he's probably, outside of Clint Eastwood, the only actor that started out in the old school studio system of Hollywood that broke down.
And TV.
And TV, yes, and TV. So he started out in that system, then went to Italy. A lot of people may or may not know that Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, Rick Dalton's character, Leonardo DiCaprio in that movie, was largely based on Burt Reynolds and his career. Because Burt Reynolds was on TV. Burt Reynolds went to Italy like Clint Eastwood to star in some spaghetti westerns, and then came back, and he didn't kill the Manson family, but
well, and he was originally the Bruce Dern character. Like, he was. I mean, he had started learning lines for it and everything. Yep.
Right. So I mean, he was supposed to be in the movie instead of Bruce Dern at the ranch. So Reynolds is kind of this interesting figure, because he is the actor that has been through all three of these major changes, like the going from studio era and TV, working in these like art house 60s movies during the era of Bonnie and Clyde and The Graduate and Dirty Harry. And then himself, blowing on into the blockbuster era, the same year as Star Wars with Smokey and the Bandit. And out of all of the stars of this period, he was the top grossing star for over a decade. For 4 years running, he beat out every actor, including Warren Beatty, Robert Redford, and Paul Newman. His movies had that much appeal. We do know that there were some issues with him if you read his autobiography or his autobiographies, that he kind of made some bad decisions. The Lonnie Anderson marriage didn't help him out in any stretch of the imagination. So his box office started to falter a little bit because he was just doing the same thing over and over again in a very similar way to somebody like Adam Sandler before he
started. Well, and I think he didn't weather it as well as Clint Eastwood did.
Right.
Because Clint Eastwood, I think, encountered some of the same issues, but managed to weather the storm of the 80s, as it were, to reemerge in the 90s as a critically acclaimed director.
Yeah, and I mean, Reynolds had a similar trajectory, but kind of sabotaged it with Boogie Nights. That kind of gave him a second life, and his like closest shot to an Oscar that he ever got, and he hated the movie and fired his agent. But in the time period that we're talking about, in the mid to late 70s, Burt Reynolds had the kind of star power to just say, like, I'm going to direct a movie and the studio is not going to control me. Or I've got this idea for a movie where I take some beer across state lines and I'm going to let the guy that's a stuntman that lives in my guest house direct it, and you're not going to say anything. And that movie is the second highest grossing movie of the year after Star Wars.
Right.
So what interests us in Burt Reynolds is the way that he makes movies in the South. And one of his most famous statements is that his idea of making a movie is if you keep the budget low enough and you make it about Southern culture, you can make your profit below the Mason-Dixon line before the thing even reaches the North, and you don't have to worry about it. So he very much was a purveyor of regional cinema, as opposed to just sort of like cookie cutter Hollywood productions. But the sad thing about Reynolds is that, you know, Boogie Nights aside and some of his other performances, after Deliverance, no one really took him seriously.
Right.
Everybody kind of thought he was very much an Adam Sandler that like was kind of coasting by on his potential, when the movies, especially the ones that he directed, totally say otherwise. So I just wanted to get your general thoughts on Burt Reynolds, and then I know that we've got some clips to kind of illustrate this point of the way that he is able to engage in this topic called the Southern Imaginary.
Right.
Which is, do you want to explain the Southern Imaginary to us?
Sure. I mean, and I think, you know, it sounds so fancy, but it's a really simple idea, which is just that there is this idea of the South, both for Southerners, people who identify as Southerners, but also those in the North, and really, frankly, all over the world, that there's this idea of what it's like, of what the American South is like. And people both, I think, play into it, kind of try to pander to ideas of it, and also critique ideas of it, even when, and especially when that reality is not maybe has ever been present. Faulkner, I think, especially really touched on this idea of the Southern Imaginary, just that there are these ideas of the South, and that they control or they can not control, but that they can strongly influence the way that we act, and that people will react in response and or in pursuit of them. Does that sound?
Yeah, I think that's great. And the fact that Burt Reynolds' South was never sort of on the poles of an Aldine or a Childers. He sort of brought them together and really kind of reveled in this nuance. So
right. Oh, do you mind if I say something really quickly?
No,
because I wanted to connect it to that. I was going to say, because you mentioned that he had this vision, that he knew that there were people in the South who were eager, desperate for content that reflected them. Partially because I think, and I've looked into this a little bit. I think there are some articles that discuss this a little bit, but I think that the South was, as it is now, I think, or maybe more that I think rural areas are going under now. But in the 50s and the 60s, I think that a lot of Southern areas felt a dearth of content that positively reflected them, because we were in the midst of the civil rights movement. You know, there was a lot of negative, there was, I think appropriately, a lot of negative focus on the South. And so everyone's daily image of the South was Alabama, was water on nonviolent protesters, attack dogs, church bombings, assassinations. It was bad, and again, I'm not saying that wasn't maybe a long time coming or necessary or anything. I'm fine with that, but I do think that it left this kind of aching void for especially a lot of I would say white and Black Southerners who were desperate for maybe some kind of positive image of the South at all. And I think it largely for Black Southerners, it came out a little bit more in blaxploitation cinema of the early 70s. But I think white Southerners didn't really have many positive images of the South until Burt Reynolds. And I think part of why it was so successful and why Jason Aldean won't be is that he wanted to provide a complicated and a positive image of the South, and that also didn't shy away from acknowledging its problems. And Jason Aldean is not interested in doing that. He's seen this, I think he seems to be seeing dollar signs in getting Ben Shapiro. Ben Shapiro doesn't care about the South, like trying to get people like that to just go, oh, yeah, you thanks for saying that, so that I have content to fight back the people I hate with. And so he's pandering in all of the in unthoughtful ways and in antagonistic ways. And Burt Reynolds wasn't doing that in Gator, which I think that's a clip from Gator. The whole film is predicated on this complicated this complicated it's a fun movie. Gator's a fun movie, but it's all predicated on this a kind of complicated political plot wherein there are different people fighting for cleaning up a corrupt county. It's a small town, but it's corrupt. It's corrupt as all get out, and even Gator's bothered by this, especially since one of his childhood friends is doing it. And in that, he's completely willing to face this hypocritical corruption of a small town. And also, it doesn't at the same time take the side of any outsiders coming in and fixing it. It seems to take the side of get somebody who knows the area to go in and who actually cares about it to go in. And he'll make do with whatever it is he's got. It won't be perfect, but it'll be authentic, and it will be concerned with the people there.
Yeah, and just to give a little bit of a background, Reynolds' first movie, what we would think of as like his first official Burt Reynolds movie after Deliverance, was a movie called White Lightning by Joseph Sargent in 1973, and Gator is the sequel to that. The plot of White Lightning, even, especially coming right out of Integration, is essentially his little brother is killed by this corrupt sheriff played by Ned Beatty, who was ironically the gentleman that was raped in Deliverance. And Gator is a moonshiner and has to go down to this small town and figure out what happened. So it's part revenge movie. But Gator's also torn between forces because the federal government is coming down on him as a moonshiner. Mm-hmm. And he's realized that the local South is corrupt and not up to his ideals. So he, in seeking this personal revenge, also tries to right the South. And Gator is an extension of that, but what makes Gator, to me anyway, even though it does have a 0% on Rotten Tomatoes, which frustrates the hell out of me.
So wrong.
One of my favorite movies of the 70s. Yeah. I'm glad Quentin Tarantino agrees with us.
But yeah, I mean, it is.
It's just one of the best because in Gator, Bama McCall, Jerry Reed, if you all have seen Smokey and the Bandit, he plays his partner in Smokey and the Bandit, is his childhood friend who has completely corrupted. Now, both of them have broken the law. You know, Gator's still making moonshine, but you know, Bama is sex trafficking, drug dealing, making the lives of the Southerners worse. It isn't a form of rebellion.
Of all colors and ages, absolutely.
Yeah. So this is a movie about like what the personal code is for someone who identifies as Southern, and it's complicated. And I mean, it's ferocious as a movie. It's got these crazy tonal shifts in the violence. But there are two clips that I want to show from this. And then I also wanted to show a clip from Sharky's Machine, which I know is one of your personal favorites, probably the best movie Reynolds ever directed, probably one of the best cop movies of the 80s, to be fair.
Yeah.
And then we're going to end with Smokey and the Bandit. But we'll watch the clips, and then we'll just kind of give some brief commentary on them, just to show the difference between, you know, Burt Reynolds' Southern vision and what we still think of as this sort of manufactured Southern imaginary. So if we could play them with sound, that would be awesome too. And then we'll talk through them. So there's two from Gator, one from Sharky, and one from Smokey.
Yeah, I think there's a disconnect on sound.
Yeah, well, I mean, we know the movies well enough, I think, that we can talk through them.
True.
So, essentially, you know, Reynolds just wants to get out of this situation. Lauren Hutton is a TV journalist who's trying to expose Bama McCall. And trying to get
an outsider, as it were.
Yeah, she's an outsider, and she's trying to get his help. And you know, she's flirting with him. They're going to become a love interest, and Chris, I'll let you take the line. He has a great line here, especially in the 1970s. And what is that?
Yeah, she whistles at him there, as if you saw it was kind of a cat call, you know. But she whistles at him, and she's like, "Hey, can I buy you?" And they're just very playfully flirting. He's, "Can I buy you a drink?" And, you know, and he goes, women's lib. I love it. And kind of playing into, and it's meant to be both. It's wonderful because it demonstrates his embrace of it. He's fine with her asking him out for a drink. And then he makes some jokes about it. You're like, you women are all the same. You just want one thing, you know, well, just because you buy me a drink, you don't own me. And he's very lovingly and enjoyably playing into the role of the man who needs to allow women to step up now because times have changed. And he's not angry about it. He's not far from it. He's embracing it. He's like, it's fine. He's always, you get the sense that Gator's the kind of person who always treated women as people, as equal people with him. So he's totally fine with that. And not only that, they have a give and take banter that they keep throughout the film. That's very much at odds with the way that Bama McCall treats both her and other women, which is frankly strictly as objects and as things that are there for his own enjoyment. You don't get that sense from Gator at all.
Yeah. And the other important thing to keep in mind here is Gator is a widow and Gator has a daughter. And the reason he's doing this in the first place in the beginning is because the federal government has said that we're going to take your daughter away from you and break up your family if you don't help us beat Bama McCall so that the governor of Georgia can be elected president.
Right.
Right. You know, a lot of people read this scene as like kind of an attack on Jimmy Carter, but Reynolds was always like very self-effacing about his politics. I mean, I feel like, you know, he had as many kind of barbs to say about really everybody in office,
Right.
and was very vague about it. But still, you know, I mean, this was coming out of this particular time. And this is something Reynolds movies probably wouldn't pass the Bechdel test, I would say, any of them. I mean, that's, we know is problematic anyway. But he's got throughout his career, you know, Candice Bergen is another example of an actress that he often worked with. All of the actors that he works with are very strong females. I mean, we've joked about like a compilation of what the women in Burt Reynolds movies are reading in certain scenes, and you know, it's very interesting. So this is not just kind of something that happened by accident. So yeah. So the next clip from Gator is sort of this ragtag team that Gator assembles, which is a theme in a lot of Burt Reynolds' movies. And we'll get a look at the visual here.
Yeah, and this is part of what you're talking about, the tonal shifts, which, you know, I think a lot of people don't apparently like. I think they're wonderful, and I think they're intentional. But he has assembled this very strange group of people. There's Lauren Hutton, who they keep referencing as coming from Vassar, although I don't think that she ever confirms that she actually went to Vassar. But they keep making the joke that she did. And you have a Jewish federal agent. I only say that because the film makes points repeatedly to say that he's Jewish, and that this is problematic for the governor who has hired him, but the governor's looking past it. And then you have this politically isolated character in the town, and it's meant to be a small town, and she's kind of meant to, I think, be a joke about liberals, although I think her first sign that she's holding up is like saying that the guy she's protesting against is a pinko commie. So I think that's not, I think the main idea is that she is this liberal activist in the South. But that's a perfect visual right there. This is the ragtag team he has, and he's fine with it. Like, he thinks they're weird, but the one thing that they all have in common is that they care about the area. Bama McCall doesn't. Bama McCall is from a small town and would absolutely be playing a Jason Aldean video and loving it. You're like, yeah, try that in a small town. That's because he runs the small town. You know, like, he will enact violence to get his way. Burt Reynolds' character, right, Gator here, will work with the Vassar journalist, the New York federal agent, and the liberal activist, because they all care about cleaning up the area. And for him, I think it's as simple as that. And that's the same is true in Sharky's Machine, where again, he has an extremely ragtag group. But the thing that they are authentic and real, and they have genuine concern for the area that they're working in.
Yeah, I mean, one of my favorite parts of Sharky's Machine is his like best friend is an African-American Buddhist.
Right.
And then he's got like the retired cops that nobody wants anymore. So,
right.
You know, it's kind of like a fresh response to identity politics that he's able to see these multifaceted too, because Gator's not a movie that's just like the federal government's evil. You know, that's why we have guns. It's the federal government is evil as represented by the IRS, but Irvin Greenfield and Gator represent somebody that's kind of bumbling, but sort of also realizes his agency and does care about his country, does care about the government. So the last clip, and we can kind of scrub through it, but what I wanted to show with these clips and what we talked about as we were prepping the show, this is from Sharky's Machine, and it's a very long clip.
It's also probably best that we don't have the audio for this.
Yeah, I mean, I do want to, like, this is one of my favorite Burt Reynolds monologues, and since this is your favorite movie, I can let you take it.
Right. Yeah. He's
very important here. And he is an Atlanta cop investigating this sex trafficking ring. So this is like a mystery neo-noir movie, but This is the scene when he confronts the bad guy, and the bad guy's like, "I'll buy you off. Look at all of these wonderful ladies." And what does Bert say, Chris?
Yeah, Burns. Well, you got it right there. He's like he comes in to kind of taunt him, but ultimately, he delivers this great monologue to him, because this guy is very smug. He's like, "Look, you think you're right, but why is everybody on my side?" And he's like, he just throws all of the most, as you can see with the captions on there. So thank you for putting those. That he's like trying to tell this guy how worthless he is and how much he can't wait to get him. But the thing that really pisses him off, the thing that really upsets him, is that he's just from out of state. He's like, what the worst part of it is? You're from out of state. It's in some ways is a really good sequel to Gator, in the sense that with Gator, he had to work through his own problems with the fact that Bama was exploiting his own people. But here we have this outsider who's just come in to try to take over Atlanta and exploit all of these people that he cares about, and it's an outsider of all things. It isn't that he's a foreigner. I think the wording is really, really specifically and very intentionally worked on. He's not a foreigner, although he is, but it's not because he's a foreigner from a different country, and it's not that he's a northerner. It's just that he's from out of state. He doesn't care about this area. He's using it for his own, to magnify his own image, and for almost called him Gator, but right, but for Sharky, that's the thing that really, really bothers him, is that I think Burt Reynolds' characters would agree with the idea of we take care of our own, but it's not in an antagonistic way. It's in a concerned way. It's in a genuine concern with the community and the people around him, regardless of how odd they are. He doesn't care.
And the delivery of it is just so cool too, because he just looks at him and says, "You're fucking up my city.
You're fucking up my city."
Out of state.
Yeah.
It's total like Burt Reynolds cool. This is a guy that's like entering his 40s at this point and is still just as cool and iconic as he was whenever he first burst onto the scene. The last clip that I want to talk about is from Smokey and the Bandit. And when we think about Smokey and the Bandit, we think about the Trans Am. I saw the movie in its 45th anniversary restoration last year in a theater with an audience, which is the first time I've seen it that way. And something that struck me about Smokey is that even though Burt Reynolds is an icon and this is the movie that made him one, this is another one of those group effort plots.
Mm-hmm.
Jerry Reed is his sidekick. To get out of jams, he works with other truckers. And there's all kinds of montages of truckers. And I think we've got one lined up where when he's in a jam and the cops are following him, he has to use a CB radio. And this was a film that made the CB radio like sell out and become this huge fad in the late 1970s. But as he's going down the road, all these truckers are moving in front of Jackie Gleason's sheriff, Buford T. Justice, and they're all like egging him on and giving him thumbs up. And some of the truckers are women, some of the truckers are people of color, some of the truckers are older men, but they're all sort of helping him stick it to this guy who is this sheriff. He's abusing his power. I mean, the irony of Smokey and the Bandit is that it's not just about a sheriff that is chasing Burt Reynolds. It's about a sheriff who knowingly and willingly breaks his jurisdiction to bring this guy to justice multiple times, to the point that he himself is breaking the law.
And for personal reasons, right? Because it's they're chasing Frog, right? They're chasing Sally Field's character, who has left Sheriff Justice's ridiculous, idiotic son at the altar. And so it's not for any good reason. It's just because he's pissing him off and he has personally embarrassed his family.
Yeah. Well, I think that brings us to the end of what I had planned. Do you have anything else you want to say about Jason Aldean, Burt Reynolds, or Tyler Childers?
No, the only thing that I'll say that I think is relevant to this is just the way in which, and to a large degree, I think this is another way that Burt Reynolds was much more successful in portraying the South, which is that both with Gator, with White Lightning and Gator, and then with Sharky's Machine, it's not a rural versus urban thing. It's a concern with the area you're in, period. They definitely play into the Southern imaginary in White Lightning and Gator. And with Sharky's Machine, you have a vision of Atlanta as a modern city. You've got the shots of Peachtree, right? You've got the yeah, so I think that's one thing that was admirable about it, was demonstrating kind of the cosmopolitan nature of that the South can, and actually really all kind of often was, which Shark is a Machine also tries to live into. It's like, look, anybody can, and that I think the CB radio craze maybe helped demonstrate. It's like anybody can be into this. This is for everyone. That's kind of it's meant to be more populist. The Jason Aldean video, and frankly, even maybe the In Our Love video, both of those have a sense that it's urban versus rural, and they're both really just fighting over the rural South, the rural imaginary, and forgetting Atlanta, forgetting New Orleans, forgetting the big cities of the South that are complicated, and as in maybe the late '70s, they're lacking reflection in our, with the exception of Atlanta, I should say, the major exception of Donald Glover's Atlanta. They're largely missing from pop culture. Although I would add in there, Justified has, I think, been a major benefit in a complicated look at federal versus rural, and local, and urban versus rural. So.
Yeah, and I would add, surprisingly too, which I think is a testament to how great it was before like the endless reboots. Dexter was also something I would consider a Southern show.
That's true.
Very different South, but that was also very much a Southern place.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
So that we've got the Smokey clip playing, and we see he's getting help here from this older trucker, using the CB lingo. We've got Jerry Reed's famous "Eastbound and Down" on the soundtrack, and if we scrub through the clip, we can see this great it's a wonderful montage. The rumor about Smokey and the Bandit, there's a great documentary about its making called The Bandit. Most movies shoot like a page and a half a day. Hal Needham hadn't really directed before, and somehow with Smokey and the Bandit, they shot 12 pages a day, which is unheard of.
Yeah, it's just ridiculous.
But it was Burt Reynolds, and Burt Reynolds had the level of power to do whatever he wanted, and after Smokey and the Bandit, he definitely was. So we see here in this clip, like the trucks and the truckers are totally screwing them over, having a great time about it because they're oppressing them. So yeah, that is, we have the female trucker here, and everybody is egging him on. There's Jerry Reed, this time not an evil local mobster, but Bert's best friend.
He's really great in both roles too. I think honestly, in some ways, Jerry Reed's a wonderful, and just as much a wonderful representation of the South in his ability to kind of embody both of those aspects. But yeah, the thing that I think that really succeeded for Reynolds and for Needham and for this film was that this is joyous. A lot of it is joyful. It is, with Buford Justice, for instance, it's a caricature of the racist cop in the South. So they're totally acknowledging that this is a problem, but at the same time, there's a kind of joyful, joyous celebration of camaraderie amongst the people.
Absolutely. Well, Chris, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciated getting the chance to talk with you about Bert again. So.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. Have a good one. And we got Chris's website up here if you're interested in some of his work. He works a lot in American crime fiction and studies of Southern popular culture. So, Chris, always a pleasure. So we're going to end our show today with a quick wrap up of the weekly film rundown. These are the films that I think this week are going to be the most appealing to see. And I will say, if you've seen Barbie, if you've seen Oppenheimer, if you've seen them twice, that's great. But don't forget, there are some really great, amazing Southern movies out this week. Not Southern movies. I am still back in my last segment. But some really great offerings. August is usually kind of considered the dumping ground for movies. But this one is really not turning out to be the case. So my pick of the week is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Mutant Mayhem. I'm not going to lie and say that is not because of nostalgia. But what is really striking about Mutant Mayhem to me is that it's written by Seth Rogen and Evan Goldberg, who brought us Superbad, Pineapple Express. They know genre movies. But this is the first time we've seen in a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie the teenage part of that title. So all of the Ninja Turtles are voiced by child actors. They sound like kids. They act like kids. This is a coming-of-age movie. More akin to the first Spider-Man with Tobey Maguire than it is to some of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movies we might have grown up with, or the Michael Bay reimaginings with Megan Fox. We've got Paul Rudd, Maya Rudolph, Rose Byrne, John Cena, Jackie Chan as Splinter. I've not had a chance to see the movie yet. It's got a 95% Rotten Tomatoes rating. I'm almost excited about this one as I was Barbie, y'all. So definitely check that one out. My second pick is Meg to the Trench. And I don't know why, but I love the fact that they just dropped the from Meg. Actually, why don't we go ahead and talk about Shortcomings since the trailer is up? Shortcomings is a movie that's playing at the Belcourt and at AMC Thoroughbred 20. It's from Randall Park. If you've seen The Interview with Seth Rogen, speaking of which, and James Franco, he played Kim Jong-un in the movie. He's also in Ant-Man and the Wasp and WandaVision as Agent Jimmy Woo. But this is a movie that's kind of a riff on the snobby 20-something film student trying to find himself. But it's also a film that doesn't take itself too seriously. It looks like a really quirky, nice Sundance comedy that is kind of exactly what we need right now in this season. So I'm also going to be checking this one out at some point this weekend. But back to the Meg. Jason Statham in the last one, he punched a megalodon. I don't know what's going to happen in this one. I've heard there's more than one Meg, which just gets my heart pumping. But, this is the way that I want to end my summer movie season, with Jason Statham facing off against prehistoric sharks. There's no better way I can think of. In addition to that, we get Ben Wheatley, who is a very renowned horror director of films like Sightseers and Kill List. He's British. He's known for being very tongue-in-cheek and having a dry sense of humor. So I think this movie's getting some really bad reviews, but my guess is people are missing the point. I'm going to hold out hope that it is as good as I think it is going to be. Another one that I don't want to fall by the radar is Dreamin' Wild. Speaking of Justified, as we talked about in our last segment, this is a movie that stars Walton Goggins, who played Boyd Crowder in Justified, and Casey Affleck. And they play musicians brothers who in their youth cut an album and their careers didn't really go anywhere. And they settle back into their small town life. But a person that is a musical historian discovers their album and ends up offering them a record deal. So they get a second chance at stardom. Their dad is played by Beau Bridges. Zooey Deschanel's in the movie. I'm really looking forward to this. When it's only playing at a handful of theaters, I think it's at Murfreesboro 16 and AMC Thoroughbred 20. But it's based on a true story, and it looks like it's a movie that knows the South very well, and I'm looking forward to seeing it. Something else I would be remiss to point out is an event that happens once a year, and that is Cat Video Fest. So for those of you that like cat videos, that spend all your time on your phones, on TikTok and Tumblr and Twitter and Facebook and everywhere else looking at cat videos, this is a collection that Ocelot Laboratories, which is an independent distribution company in New York, puts out every year. Local theaters like the Belcourt show the movie over a weekend, and they raise money for their local animal shelters. This is a pet project and a passion of mine, because a lot of people don't know that when animals are in shelters, a lot of the times there's really no such thing as a no-kill shelter, because shelters run out of room. So there are a lot of animals that need homes that are put down. A lot of groups are working to make sure that no shelter is no-kill, and giving the facilities and the funds to be able to do that, and the funds to be able to neuter and spay animals. But we're not there yet, and it's much worse in metro areas. I know in small towns, a lot of these goals have been reached. So Cat Fest, if you love cat movies, if you love cat videos, you're going to get to see a 70-minute program of the best cat videos of the year from Ocelot Laboratories. And they've got a really great trailer that I've linked to in the weekly film rundown that sort of is, hilarious and doesn't take the whole thing too seriously. So definitely contact your local shelter for a sweet new pet. There are so many animals in need all around, and most of them might not live 1 to 2 years when they have lifespans of 14 to 20 if you don't. So this is my public service announcement, but also my yearly trip to the movies where I do support a cause like this. So highly recommend it. If you're looking for date night, if you're hanging out on Bumble, probably couldn't go wrong with this one more than anything else, I feel like. And I love this trailer that's kind of like a riff on The Martian and 2001 a little bit. And I'll wait for the joke here before we move on. Yeah, it's just a great little trailer. They've done a really good job with the marketing here. We also have a couple of other films opening up that are getting less coverage. There is Mobland with John Travolta. And Mobland is a movie about a small town sheriff who has to face off against Stephen Dorff's New Orleans hitman because some of the citizens of his town stole some pills from some mobsters. It's not getting very good reviews, but I'm holding out hope because the director is actually from New Orleans. So this is not an example of some northerner coming down and abusing the South, essentially. So it's worth checking out. For some reason, it is only playing at AMC Murfreesboro 16, and I cannot quite figure out why. We've also got 3 other films opening up. There is a horror movie called Till Death Do Us Part with Jason Patric that looks like it's kind of a cross between Scott Pilgrim and the 2019 horror movie Ready or Not with Samara Weaving from the guys who restarted the Scream franchise. I think both of those are probably going to be much better movies than this one, but I will probably give it a shot at some point. We also have 2 documentaries. Bobi Wine, The People's President, which, for those of you that have been following the news, Bobi Wine is Uganda's biggest pop star, and he is challenging a dictator that has been in office for almost 40 years. I'm a little bit leery about this movie because A, it's got a 100% Rotten Tomatoes rating, but B, I can't find anything about Bobi Wine's platform, and the legacy media seem to adore him. I think also just having to deal with Justin Jones as a resident of the greater Nashville area and the People's Plaza, any of these alliterative statements with the word people in them just kind of make me think of fraud. But, I'm sure at some point I might watch this just to figure out who the hell this guy is. I don't think it's going to be a particularly good movie. I don't think it's worth spending your money at the theater at this week, but maybe check it out. We also have a documentary called The Highest of Stakes that is about a controversial crypto figure. This is a movie that I don't think we really needed another entry in the genre. So I would say unless you have a pressing interest in crypto, that would be one to skip. And that wraps up our weekly film rundown and our show. So this is Jerod Hollyfield signing off. And whatever you do this weekend, give it some thought. I will see you next week.